Soothe is a kind of man who doesn't beg. He doesn't send paragraphs. He doesn't check if you got home safe. He doesn't lose himself in the name of connection. And because of that, the world calls him cold. But Spinoza would call him something else, free. Now, look at yourself. Be honest. How many times have you loved someone more than your dignity allowed? Something unresolved. How many times have you overwritten your own instincts? Silenced your better judgment, just to keep a woman interested? How many times did you answer when she ignored you, stayed when she pulled away, wept like a boy when you should have walked like a man? You called it love, but it wasn't love. It was emotional slavery dressed in perfume and illusion. Spinoza saw you before you were even born. He saw the man destroyed by his own passions, and he wrote, an emotion, which is a passion, ceases to be a passion as soon as we form a clear and distinct idea of it. Meaning, the moment you understand your feelings, they lose their power over you. But you never try to understand them. You let them drive you, unresolved. Let them speak for you, cry for you, define you. You let them make you weak. She didn't leave because you were stoic, something unresolved. She left because you were unstable. She didn't lose interest because you were distant, something unresolved. She lost interest because your emotions were cheap, available on demand, public, weak, worshipful, unresolved. You were a man praying at the altar of female validation, and you mistook your addiction for devotion. Spinoza's entire philosophy is war against that illusion. He didn't believe emotions were evil, but he believed that if they ruled you, they would destroy you. And you are living proof. You live at the mercy of your moods. You fall in love too fast. You explain yourself too often. You're terrified of being misunderstood. And that is why women don't trust you with leadership. Because you can't even lead yourself. The emotionless man, he's not heartless. He's disciplined. His silence isn't weakness, it's sovereignty. His detachment isn't trauma, it's order. He does not react, he calculates. He preserves. He sees her cows and does not enter it. He sees her withdrawal and doesn't panic. He sees her beauty and does not kneel. He has mastered what Spinoza called the freedom of the wise. The ability to feel without becoming enslaved by what is felt. You don't need more sensitivity. You need strength. You don't need to open up more. Unresolved. You need to shut the door to anything that makes you betray yourself. Because the emotionless man is not a myth. He exists, and he is feared. Not because he harms, but because he cannot be harmed by what destroys most men their own desperation for love. You've been told to be emotional. Spinoza tells you to be exact. And if you want to survive the modern game of affection, where attention is currency and heartbreak is entertainment, you'd better learn to stand like Jung. Still, calm, unmoved, untouchable. You think women left you but didn't say enough, because you didn't feel enough. Because you didn't open up enough. No, brother. They left because you felt too loudly. Because you made your emotions cheap, accessible, unresolved, and easy to manipulate. You gave them everything, and in doing so, you gave them nothing of value. Let me tell you something Spinoza understood with terrifying clarity. Anything that can be moved by another is not free. And you, emotional, vulnerable, desperate to prove you're not like other men, you were moved by everything. A glance, a word, a text, a delay, unresolved. Your emotional life was outsourced to her every mood swing. Your dignity was held hostage by her attention. And the worst part, you called that love. But the emotionless man, he doesn't flinch. Not because he doesn't feel, but because his feelings bow to him, not to her. Spinoza didn't hate emotion. That's where most men misunderstand him. What he hated, what he warned against, was passivity, the condition of being acted upon. That is what separates the emotionless man from the emotional addict. He feels, but he chooses when and where. He doesn't surrender to chaos, he studies it. He doesn't lash out in anger, because anger is just sadness in armor, something unresolved. He doesn't collapse into grief, because grief is just ego in mourning, unresolved. And he doesn't call obsession loyalty, because he knows that to worship another human being is to insult the divine within himself. That it is Spinoza's darkest gift to use, the awareness that our suffering is not love. That most of what men call romantic pain is just an unexamined weakness. You think heartbreak makes you deep. It doesn't. Something unresolved. It just proves that you invested your identity into something that could walk away. And here's the cruel irony. Women are not repelled by your lack of emotion. They are repelled by your inability to master it. Resolved. The emotionless man doesn't apologize for being distant. He isn't trying to prove his worth through access or oversharing. He doesn't text paragraphs. He doesn't ask, "What are we?" He never begs for clarity because he is clarity. His life is not a plea, it's a principle. And principles do not negotiate. He doesn't fear loneliness because solitude isn't punishment for him. It's peace. It's his monastery, his forge, his battlefield. Most men crumble in silence, he builds in it. Most men chase validation, he guards his energy like sacred fire, something unresolved. Most men wait to be chosen, he chooses himself every single time. You've been trained to believe that if you're not emotionally available, you're broken. No, what's broken is a man who has no boundaries. What's broken is a man who teaches women that love means total surrender, unresolved. What's broken is a man who has no compass except the temperature of someone else's affection. And what's strong, what's terrifying to the world, is a man who cannot be moved unless he decides to move. That is the emotionless man. That is the one Spinoza would call wise. Not because he feels less, but because he knows the exact cost of every emotion and refuses to bleed where it isn't sacred. Let's stop pretending. Most of your emotional wounds came from the belief that giving more would eventually earn you love. You believed that your availability was value. You believed that expressing everything made you honest. You believed that the more emotionally invested you were, the more irreplaceable you'd become. But you were wrong. And Spinoza would have looked at your suffering not with pity, but with diagnosis. You weren't betrayed by her. You were betrayed by your ignorance of how emotions actually work. You thought emotion was a sign of connection. Spinoza taught, it's more often a symptom of confusion. And until you become clear, internally ordered, you are not in love. You are in bondage. Do you understand what that means? It means that every time you opened up to someone who hadn't earned it, every time you trusted a woman with your entire soul, because you were afraid of losing her, every time you loved without boundaries, you weren't being brave, you were being conquered. Spinoza saw emotion not as a gift, but as a force, one that, when misunderstood, turns men into servants. And the emotionless man, he is not free of feeling. He is free through understanding. That's the difference. That's the reason why, when the world burns, He doesn't run around screaming with the crowd. He watches, he waits, and he chooses rationally, not reactively. Because the emotionless man has killed the need, that unspoken need most men carry, the need to be loved, to be wanted, to be affirmed by a woman's gaze. That trembling, aching void that makes you answer messages too quickly, accept disrespect quietly, and confuse sex with intimacy. The emotionless man burned that part of himself away, and what rose in its place was something dangerous. Not aggressive, not abusive, but powerful in a way that makes emotionally chaotic people recoil. Women test him, and he does not move. They pull back, and he does not chase. They explode, and he stays calm, because he understands, with Spinoza's precision, that to be moved by another is to be owned by them. Now, let me ask you, how many people own you? How many people have keys to your nervous system? How many people, with a look, or a delay, or a change in tone, can rewrite your entire day? You think you're strong because you go to the gym, because you speak with confidence, because you post about self-worth. But the real test of strength is this: who owns your peace? Spinoza's dark revelation isn't just that emotions can destroy you. It's that most men secretly want to be destroyed, just so they can feel something intense enough to forget how empty they are. That's why you tolerate disrespect. That's why you stay when you should go. That's why you wait for her to choose you instead of walking away with dignity. You think pain means depth. But to Spinoza, real depth is a man who feels everything and chooses stillness anyway. That is what it means to be untouchable. That is what it means to be emotionless. Not because you don't have a heart, but because your heart is under your command. You want to know why most men fail with women? Because they think emotional exposure is power. They think showing their wounds makes them worthy. They think vulnerability, unfiltered, unearned, is some kind of currency. But Spinoza would laugh at that, not because emotion is weakness, but because emotion without understanding is chaos. And that's what you've become, a chaos agent in your own life. Every time she pulls back, your anxiety rushes in like wildfire. Every time she criticizes you, you abandon your boundaries to win her back. Every time she makes you feel insecure, you try to prove your worth through more access, more affection, more performance. You are reacting like an addict. And addicts don't love, they depend. Spinoza wrote, "An emotion which is a passion is a confused idea. That confusion, it's your daily state. You feel strongly, but you don't know why. You need her presence, but you can't explain the emptiness it fills. You spiral in silence, then act out in desperation, and then wonder why nothing ever feels solid." The emotionless man has cut through all of that. He doesn't feel less, he feels with clarity. That's what most of you lack. You feel intensely, but never intelligently. And let me tell you something brutal. A woman cannot respect a man whose emotions control him more than he controls them. She cannot trust a man who is moved more by her moods than by his mission. And she will never surrender to a man whose emotional world depends on her attention. That's why she ghosted you. That's why she looked bored while you poured your heart out. That's why she admired the man who said less but carried more presence. Because deep down, even she knew you were still a boy asking to be seen. And here's the revelation: you don't become emotionless by numbing yourself. You become emotionless by finally owning yourself. By being the man who walks into the storm and does not flinch. By being the man who can be in love without losing center. By being the man who knows, even if she walks away, I remain. This is what Spinoza meant when he said, "The wise man is guided by reason, not fortune." Most men live at the mercy of fortune, at the mercy of affection, timing, chemistry, and approval. But the emotionless man, he doesn't live at mercy. He lives by design. And this terrifies people, because emotional detachment is the ultimate rebellion in a world that feeds on your reactions. They want you impulsive. They want you broken. They want you crying, confused, doubting yourself. Because a man who doubts himself can be sold anything: love, redemption, control, guilt. But the emotionless man buys none of it. He walks away from manipulation. He stays calm when disrespected. He doesn't punish women. He simply vanishes, because his power doesn't need to announce itself. It speaks in silence. It radiates through presence. And most importantly, it never begs. She called you heartless, not because you hurt her, but because you stopped apologizing for protecting your peace. She said you changed. She said you're distant now. But what really happened is that you woke up. You stopped trying to win a war by bleeding more than your enemy. You stopped mistaking silence for failure. You stopped calling emotional collapse romantic effort. And now, you're dangerous, not because you want revenge, but because you've tasted the rarest fruit a man can ever know: emotional independence. Spinoza never said, "Don't feel." He said, "Feel wisely. Feel without being owned. Feel in a way that brings order, not destruction." That's what men never learned, because from childhood, you were taught to base your value on how much you feel, not how deeply you understand. That's why you became easy to manipulate, because your emotions were untamed. And Spinoza's entire ethics was a map out of that trap. He wrote, "The more you strive to live according to the guidance of reason, the more free you are from the emotions, which are passions, and the more you become the cause of your own emotions." Let that sink in. To be the cause of your own emotions. Not her, not your past, not your triggers. You. That's the birth of the emotionless man. The man who doesn't seek validation. The man who doesn't perform kindness for intimacy. The man who doesn't open up just because he's afraid of losing her. He opens up when it's earned, when it's safe, when it's his choice. He understands the cost of exposing his soul, and he's no longer willing to throw it at the feet of someone just because she smiled at him twice. This man doesn't brag about being detached. He doesn't need to. His energy says everything. He speaks calmly, listens clearly, and walks away from emotional bait with the precision of a surgeon cutting out disease. He doesn't explode, he exits. He doesn't argue, he observes. He doesn't plead, he pauses. Because he knows, anyone who can trigger you controls you. And you, listening to this now, need to face that one brutal truth for most of your life. You've been emotionally outsourced. You've handed women the blueprint to your nervous system. You've allowed your entire identity to rise and fall based on whether or not she replies. That isn't love. That's dependence. And dependence is where dignity goes to die. But you can change. Because if Spinoza taught us anything, it's that true power lies not in avoiding emotion, but in understanding it so well that it no longer hijacks your soul. This is the path of the emotionless man. He isn't bitter, he's clean. He isn't numb, he's composed. And he doesn't run from love. He just refuses to let love turn him into someone he can't respect. You were told to be in touch with your feelings, but no one taught you how to govern them. So you lived like a man with his skin turned inside out, bleeding on everyone, hoping someone would call it love. That ends now. Because the emotionless man is not an empty man. He's a man who no longer confuses emotional chaos with meaning. He's a man who saw what his unchecked feelings did to his life, how they made him beg, break, betray himself, and he said, never again. That is Spinoza's final and most terrifying revelation. That the man who masters his emotions becomes untouchable. Not because he doesn't care, but because he refuses to be owned.